So I was out the other day, day drinking, which is what I do when I'm not evening drinking, or late night drinking, or morning drinking, when I had what we in the community call a moment of clarity. No, nothing about my alcohol intake, which is quite reasonable, thank you very much. I came to realize that the entire concept of tolerance as it exists today in Canada is stupid. Before you wonder, these thoughts did not occur in a vacuum. Recently, Quebec has been embroiled in a public debate over Bill 21, a proposed law that, in the name of secularism, would ban public service employees from wearing any ostentatious religious symbols. I say embroiled, but I really should add a caveat. The bill enjoys majority support in Quebec. Now, Quebecers are fairly suspicious of religion, for good or ill, but that is the way they choose to run their society. The opposition to the bill is mostly centered in Montreal, which holds the majority of Quebec's immigrant population, and is spearheaded by the likes of Hampstead Mayor William Steinberg, Montreal Mayor Valérie Plante, and the Liberal Party of Quebec. These actors all have in common the fact that their base is the island of Montreal. So far so good, officials trying to represent their constituents and being foiled by the provincial government, which knows that it represents a much larger consensus outside of the island and is willing to spend the political capital necessary to invoke the notwithstanding clause. Then the rest of the country had to get involved. And that got on my fucking nerves. Cue Andrew Coyne gracing us with another ill-informed column calling the law religious discrimination. It isn't. It's a universal dress code. Or the Toronto Star publishing an article calling the bill ultra-controversial. It became pretty clear to me that those outside of Quebec throwing a bitch fit about the whole thing didn't understand the first thing about what is going on here. You see, most Canadians don't understand Quebec, and, this brings me to my next point, they don't understand multiculturalism either, its practice or its implications, which is funny because Canada is officially a multicultural country.
Because it's 2015.
Courtesy of, you guessed it, OG Trudeau himself.
How far would you go with that? How far would you extend that?
Well, just watch me.
The irony here being that your average Canadian will point to multiculturalism as being something that makes Canada unique, that distinguishes it. This ignores the fact that the US, France, Germany, Norway, Sweden, and a few others I won't mention all aggressively push the multicultural angle, not exactly a unique feature. The average pro-multicultural Canadian has a rather superficial view of what multiculturalism is. If you were to ask the average Ontarian what multiculturalism entails, you'll get the canned responses of, and stop me if this sounds familiar, exotic food, pretty colorful clothes, festivals, colorful foreign stuff that I don't understand, more exotic food, Sikhs, badass Sikhs and their cool turbans. Gosh, did you see this badass Sikh police officer wearing a turban even though everyone else has to wear a peaked cap? Did I mention exotic food? Newsflash, dipshits. Culture ain't some fucking flavor of the month attire that you can boil down to food, clothing, and music. That's what we call stereotyping. So check your micro privileges, you macro aggressors.
Instead of looking at multiculturalism as a whole bunch of a mainstream culture, going to a school gym on a given day and, going to different booths and, sampling, samosas here and then going over to see a Berber dance over here. And then, we have instead an entire school celebrating Diwali, the Festival of Lights, or looking up their Chinese horoscopes or talking about
Culture is fundamentally political. It informs how people think, moral values, a sense of right and wrong, and expresses itself quite often through a different conception of how the state should be run and what legal principles should be dominant. Take away all of these things and you're left with window dressings, the trappings of culture, but with nothing behind it. Colorful, harmless tokenism. This is, ironically enough, bigoted, and it reveals the true color of progressives everywhere. By reducing the foreign to pretty colors, spicy food, and nothing else, one fundamentally denies the intrinsic value in these cultures in their ability to elaborate and execute a fundamentally different model of society. Canada's legal system outside of Quebec is based on British common law. It's an individualistic system that puts the rights of the individuals far above those of the collectivity. In that sense, it is uniquely Anglo-Saxon. 2 generations of government-mandated multiculturalism have not and will not change that fact anytime soon. In that sense, Canada is not multicultural since it still insists on running the state the Anglo-Saxon way, with common law, free enterprise, the absence of blasphemy laws, freedom of conscience, and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The fact that brown people are allowed to dress the way they want or come in large numbers changes nothing to that fact. If Ontario's substantial Indian minority began agitating for a fundamental change in our constitution to better reflect the Indian culture's innate conservatism in comparison to Canadian society, you would find that the tolerant left would be a lot less tolerant. Quebec is different than the rest of Canada. It has a different legal system, the Code Civil. It has a different conception of the relationship between the individual and the collectivity, as it places more importance on the common good at the expense of individualism.
Of particular concern in this area are services to minority populations. Most of the public services in this area are available in French only. It is only in the last 10 years that we have had a group dedicated to trying to help the English population in this area. I would really appreciate your comments on this subject.
Merci. Thank you. Si vous permettez, je vais répondre en français pour que tout le monde puisse entendre. Merci de votre utilisation de nos 2 langues officielles au pays. On est au Québec, donc je vais répondre en français.
Quebec's culture privileges monoculture, and that is a feature of its identity, not a bug. But watch as the supposedly multicultural Canada refuses to accept that fact. That is because Canadian multiculturalism cannot fundamentally accept a cultural outlook that is not itself multicultural. In that sense, Canada's multiculturalism is in fact neither multicultural nor is it particularly tolerant, although it does do a good job of maintaining the appearance that it is. Quebec has now been dragged through the mud as being a province of bigots, racists, intolerance, and on and on and on. But then it wouldn't be the first time. Quebec bashing is, as we know, a well-established tradition in Canada. Which is funny, because by doing so, Canadians expose their own intolerance for a society that has a different culture than them.
Came when the former Prime Minister went to Ottawa for a book launch. Our chief political correspondent, Jason Moskowitz, was there.
Quebec is distinct, so is Ontario. You can't be distinct from somebody without somebody being distinct from you, can you?
While the Chrétien government keeps talking about giving more power to the provinces, the champion of a strong central government says decentralization would be a mistake.
So if there's any give by the federal government, it will have to be traded against give by the provinces. And if they don't play that game, then Canada's finished.
This brings us to the point of this video. Tolerance is paradoxical because in order to be tolerant, one must tolerate intolerance. The modern conception of tolerance has found a solution to this dilemma in the form of Karl Popper's solution. I quote, "In order to maintain a tolerant society, the society must be intolerant of intolerance." End quote. Well, this is an absolute cop-out, and for a simple reason. Who gets to define what constitutes intolerance, Karl? Is it you? Is it the government? Such a system is ripe for abuse because all it does is create a vague category which makes it allowable to suppress opinions and thoughts. One need only define something as intolerant and then it becomes acceptable to be intolerant while calling oneself tolerant. It's Orwellian. If the government wants to suppress opponents, it needs only succeed at labeling them as holding some sort of bigoted views, and the media and internet lynch mobs will do the rest like the trained monkeys that they are. Tolerance as an absolute is impossible, yet incomplete tolerance is no tolerance at all. We're back to where we started, or rather, we never left. Tolerance is a lie, a shroud that the modern neoliberal state places in front of the common man's eyes that says, "Look at how great society is under our leadership. We're so much nicer than those mean old people from the ancient times, Ignore your stagnant wages, the degradation of your environment, the commodification of your culture. Ignore the fact that we're bringing down old beautiful buildings everywhere and replacing them by concrete abominations. Ignore the fact that you've been reduced to nothing more than a well-fed, drug-addled serf, because at least we're not bigots. All that to say that Canadian multiculturalism is Walmart multiculturalism. It tolerates people looking different, but not fundamentally acting different. They'll take 1 million Sikhs, Chinese, Indians, Persians, Russians, French, Africans. It doesn't matter, so long as they speak white, act white, and vote white, which is to say liberal. But as soon as Quebec actually tries to establish a societal model that diverges from the diktats of the cult progressive, cue the outrage and the accusations of atavistic tendencies, and so on and so forth. I'm Cash, and I'm gonna go drink to cope with the crippling tendency that making this video has given me. Thanks, Obama.